What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to break down what on earth Jerome Powell just said and how the market may respond to his words. I'm going to talk about SPY, Nvda, Tsla, and the QQQ, and a couple of tickers out there, and then talk about what's going to happen tomorrow for the markets as we have some big data dropping and more earnings. But before I break anything down with all this information, before I talk about anything about the markets and what Jerome Powell just said, let me just mention a couple of things before starting. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just 7 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so looking at the market, we had a very strange day. I mean, to start us off, we were just trading kind of sideways, saw the market drop just a little bit, then bounce right back. Then after that, the market was just very sideways for the majority of the day, very boring. Then we had the rate hike decision that came out right about here. The market started to see more volatility. And then all of a sudden, Jerome Powell started speaking right about here. And a couple of minutes after, we got this monstrous pump to the upside. We saw SPY rally very nicely up to almost $457 a share. Before it came all the way back, it dumped right back down to about $453 before bouncing again and closing just barely green. And we're pretty flat in the after hours, a little bit red. So lots of volatility at the very end of the day because of Jerome Powell. And what he said was very ambiguous. He said lots of things that could pump the markets and also dump the markets. I'm going to break down what he said in just a couple of minutes. Let's first talk about earnings. How are things going so far? So Meta came out and they did better than expected, and their guidance is looking very optimistic for the third quarter. And as a result of this, Meta is up about, last time I checked, it was up like 5% in the after hours. It's now up about 6%. Meta is holding up very nicely, pushing up very strongly. And overall, this is some good news for them. Now, this could help the markets for tomorrow, but the question is, will that be the bigger reaction that the market's going to see, or is it going to once again just react to what Jerome Powell said? And in my opinion, I think Powell will still have an effect on the market for tomorrow, but it's going to be a little bit confusing because of what Powell has said and what the market's going to choose to move based off of. Now, for tomorrow, we also have some data coming out. We have some GDP numbers coming out, the GDP growth rate quarter over quarter. But the more important piece of data is going to be the initial jobless claims, all the jobs numbers coming out for tomorrow. We want this to be as expected, very close to consensus. We don't want this to be way too low, because if the jobs numbers are too low, the Fed is going to be incentivized to be more on the hawkish side, as Jerome Powell implied. And if initial jobless claims, is lower than expected, this is going to cause the market to slow down. So be very careful with this data dropping 1 hour before the market opens at 8:30 a.m. New York time. And we're going to see if this is very close to the consensus around the 230,000 mark. Now, besides that, there's not really much else data coming out until Friday when we have the PCE report. So I'm going to be very cautious going into tomorrow. Now, to add on to this, the last thing to mention is the fact that we have more earnings coming out as well. So far, we have Meta doing relatively well, which could help the market for tomorrow. But then in the morning, we have McDonald's and Southwest, MasterCard, and just a couple of others. And the bigger earnings for tomorrow are going to be Intel, Roku, and Ford. Those are going to be some big ones affecting the market going into Friday as well. But now let's talk about Jerome Powell. What on earth did the big guy say? And Powell came out and he said very mixed things. Some of the things he said were bullish for the markets, other things were bearish, some things were more hawkish, other things not so much. And he basically kept on reiterating that the Fed is going to wait for data before making any objective moves. So the Fed does not know what they're going to do in the future. That's what he claims. They're just going to wait for the data. He mentioned that there is a possibility of more rate hikes going forward. But they're going to have to look at the data just to be safe. He kept on repeating that over and over again. That's kind of in the middle, not too like bullish or bearish. And then he said some bearish things and a couple of bullish things too. He said that inflation is still too elevated, especially on the core side. But he did say that the probability of a soft landing went up, and the Fed may have to remain more restrictive for longer. So once again, a little bit more on the hawkish side. But then he said that they're no longer forecasting a recession, which is like bullish. But then he mentioned that there could be pain for the job sector. We could see a softening of the labor markets, basically. He mentioned that we're still yet to see the true effects of the rate hikes. It's going to take a little bit more time. So, like I said before, very mixed stuff. But the most important thing here would be the fact that he said that there's no longer going to be the Fed forecasting a recession. This is a big change, and this was very bullish. And if he left it on that note, the market could have held up very nicely. That's why the market was pumping. But then he came back and he said other things. So right here, you can see people are now talking about how the Fed is saying that they're not forecasting a recession, but there is going to be some pain to come anyways. But then Powell said this, which caused the market to dump. And he said that he does not see inflation back at 2% until about 2025. And he's referring to core inflation. He also mentioned the Fed will not be cutting rates this year. So that's very important to note. And besides all of that, those are basically some of the main points that Powell made. He kept on reiterating that the Fed has no true way of telling us what they're going to do for the next FOMC meeting. They're just going to have to react to data. So very mixed stuff. If the market is looking at the fact that the Fed is saying that they're not forecasting a recession, the market could pump tomorrow off that news. But if the market decides to, react more towards Powell saying that the Fed has to remain more restrictive for longer and keep rates high, and they're not going to see inflation go down to 2% until 2025, that could cause the market to drop. So Powell said both bullish and bearish things. He wasn't really that consistent, so it's very tricky to tell which way the market's going to go. And for that reason, I don't really want to predict it because I don't know exactly how it's going to go. I do want to note that there's a good chance the market will not dump insanely hard, though, because of Meta's earnings. Meta did very, very well, and it's holding up nicely, so that could help the market hold up. But like I said before, we just have to watch it on a level to level basis for now. And then after all this stuff is like out of the way, the reaction to Powell and etc., then I could give you guys more predictions and be a lot more objective after that. But for now, we just have to be unbiased and see the reaction. I mean, it's just all over the place. I don't know which direction the market's going to pick to react to. It really depends on what they want at this point. Now, for the bulls, if we do see a primarily bullish reaction, you're going to be watching 456, 457 on SPY, 457.5, and then 458. If the bears have the edge tomorrow, we're going to see the market come all the way down to about 454, 453.5, 452.69, to potentially 450. We're kind of in the middle, so we might just go back and forth again, kind of like today. I'm not too sure, to be honest with everyone. We're just going to have to wait. And then once all of this is settled, I could go back to making predictions. We just have to wait and see what the reaction really is. Powell was just all over the place. On the IWM, a bullish reaction is going to make this thing test like the $196 area. Then we have 197.16 as the next resistance, then 198 above that. If it breaks down, you're going to be watching 195.74, and below that we have 194.5, followed by 193.5. Watch those areas very carefully. For Tesla, it's kind of in the middle. I mean, if we do get a pump tomorrow, depending on the reaction, I mean, we're going to be watching 267.5 as one resistance, followed by 268. And above 268, we're going to be watching Tesla make its way all the way up to 270, 272, and 275. For support, you have to be watching this 263 area, 261 and beyond. So far, it's holding up quite decently. But from a technical standpoint, I just want to note that Tesla is still trying to make a higher high right over here and establish a different trend. You can see relative to this 253 area, it's holding up quite nicely. Now, is there this imbalance down here? I mean, you could argue that, but I'm not really fixated on either direction on Tesla. There's also an imbalance up here, so it really could go either way. I mean, if we get the really bullish reaction, then we're going to be just watching the direction. For now, it's looking like it's trying to hold up and potentially try to get a retest of like 266. But I'm going to wait for the reaction just to be safe. NEO in particular is very bullish looking. Approaching August, they have some very big data coming out. I'm going to talk more about this, I would say, over the weekend. But when the numbers come out, so far they're looking very strong. They did 4,700 deliveries for just last week, and they're projected to do well over like 15,000 or so, which is going to be a new all-time record for NEO for the monthly deliveries. If they announce that in the beginning of August, this thing is going to go berserk. This thing looks very bullish. I could see this thing going all the way up to 22 if they get some good data. For Aapl, it's just stuck in the middle, to be honest with you all. This chart is not looking like super bullish or bearish. There's a possible inverse head and shoulder structure that it could be a little bit more bullish, but there's no confirmed breakouts just yet. If it breaks above like 196, we could see a push for 198. If it breaks below 194, there's some support around 193.69. If that fails, then 192 is going to be retested all the way down here. We're still in the middle for Aapl, but I am leaning a tiny bit more bullish looking at the current technicals, but we have to wait and see what the reaction is to Jerome Powell just to be safe. For the triple Q, it's trying to get a bounce. We're going to be watching if this thing could get above 380. If it manages to do so, 382 is very, very possible. If it fails to do so and we get a rug pull, depending on what we interpret for tomorrow, 375 is possible. A break below that, then we have 373. Now, normally I do give you guys predictions, but just to be safe and just to be honest, I don't know how the market's going to react. But I can tell you there's a possible inverse head and shoulders forming on the triple Q, and there is a possibility the market's going to try to bounce. It's a possibility, but we need some confirmation first. We need to see this thing break above 380. If it does so, then we have the potential to start filling some of these imbalances way up here. But for now, we have to wait. For Nvda, this stock is looking pretty nice to me. We have a nice potential inverse head and shoulder structure, just like the triple Q. Nice cup and handle like formation is developing. And if the market's very bullish, thanks to the Fed saying they're not forecasting the recession, the odds do favor upside for Nvda. Okay, it's looking more bullish from a technical standpoint, but we have to see confirmation tomorrow, just in case we get a very, very strange, nuanced reaction from the markets. So if we get a bad reaction tomorrow, I mean, we're going to be watching the video retest 450. That fails us, then we're going to be watching 446, then 444, followed by 440. If it manages to break to the upside, you're going to be watching this thing make its way up to about this 460 area. If that breaks, it could go a lot higher. So basically, what do I think is more likely, though, based off this trend? I just want to note this. Anything could happen tomorrow depending on the reaction, but I'm leaning more bullish on Nvidia still because it's a very nice looking setup. And with this accumulation structure that is developing, forming this symmetrical inverse head and shoulders, there's a good chance it's going to go all the way up to 480 very soon. I'm leaning more in that direction, but I want to watch for confirmation first and see the reaction to Jerome Powell first before making any moves. For Microsoft, it came down a bit, but it is getting bought right back up. I'm going to be watching for a bounce on it. I want to see this thing test 342. But first, let's see what the reaction is to Jerome Powell. If we do get a bearish one, it could come all the way back down to 333. A bullish reaction is going to take it up to 442. 342. I'm leaning more in the direction of 342 to be tested. For AMD, if we're bullish, we want to see this thing make its way up to about 111.6, break above that. And then we have this imbalance up here to get filled at 112. Then we have 113.22. If you're bearish, you want to see 109, 107, and those entire areas to be retested. What do I think is more likely? I mean, looking at this trend, it's looking a little weak right now, but it is trying to base around this level right here. So we're going to be watching if this thing could try to break and bounce or not. It is a possibility that it tries to do so, but there isn't really much of a confirmation of this thing bouncing. So it all depends on the reaction to Powell for tomorrow on this one. Let's just look at a couple of others real quick. The dollar is actually down just a little bit thanks to the Fed, so this could be a little bullish for the markets. It did form a head and shoulders like structure, and there could be a little bit more downside coming down to this imbalance around this 100.75 area. That makes me a little bit more bullish, but just to be safe, let's watch for confirmation for tomorrow. And then after that, we have like Google holding up very nicely, actually, in my opinion. If you look at Google, still holding up. If the Bears take control, I mean, we could get a retest of like 128 to 126. If the Bulls take control, we could see it break 132. In my opinion, there's a good chance it's going to try to hold very close to the 130s, try to hold around this area for the majority of the day. And we might see a bounce thanks to Powell. Now, there was a lawsuit involving Amazon that was just announced. It is forming a potential bullish structure, so there's a good chance it's going to make its way up to about 130 again. But we're going to wait and see what happens with Jerome Powell and the reaction. So we're just watching to see if it can make its way up to 130. If it fails to do so, then 125 is a possibility. For Meta, it's up about 6.23% as of right now, holding up very, very nicely. A very nice looking accumulation structure developed right here. I'm going to be watching 320 on Meta to see if we could try to break above that. And if it manages to break 325, we could see this thing fly a lot nicer. Looks very nice so far with these bullish looking structures. But just to be safe, I'm going to be watching for a small retracement first, maybe a back test of about like 315 or so before it tries to balance and break above 325. So we're going to be watching these levels carefully and then see the reactions to the market based off what Powell said. For some tickers, such as like Aapl, Nvda, not to mention a few others like Neo, I'm still leaning more bullish on most stocks, or at least a lot of them. But just to be safe, let's see how the market chooses to respond based off what Powell said. He said some things that could cause the market to tank, other things that could cause the market to run. My gut tells me that the news about the Fed saying that they're not really forecasting a recession is going to help the market pump. But just to be safe, okay, let's watch for confirmation just to be safe, okay? I'm going to try to be honest with everyone, and we will wait and see. But anyways, thank you all for listening. Please have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. I will talk more about the reaction tomorrow morning, and it's going to be a very interesting day. Big things are coming out from data in the morning to earnings, not to mention even more data for Friday and the reaction to Jerome Powell. My gut tells me a little bit more bullish for most tickers, but just to be safe, we're going to wait and see. All right, Have a good one, everyone. Remain calm, cool, and collected. Watch support and resistance, and I'll see you guys in the next one. The market to the moon is the long term is very bright, and peace out.